In the heart of the Oklahoma plains, where the wind rolled endlessly across tall yellow grass, stood a small wooden cabin. It had no neighbors for miles, no fence, and no sign of recent life. Yet every morning the dust before its door was marked by footprints. Some were small, like those of a child. Others were heavy, dragging slightly, as if burdened by years or sorrow. Yet inside the cabin, no one lived. The place had been abandoned since the spring of 1908, when tragedy had struck the McCall family. Locals whispered that the cabin was haunted by the memories of those who never left in peace. Travelers who dared approach said the air grew heavy with the scent of rain, even on clear days. And sometimes when the wind howled through the plains, you could hear faint laughter and crying. That's when Evelyn Hart, a 24-year-old schoolteacher, first saw the footprints. Evelyn was new to the area, having arrived from Kansas City to teach the children of a scattered farming community. Her rented room overlooked the endless stretch of prairie, and from her window, she could see the lonely silhouette of the McCall cabin standing against the horizon. Each morning, as she rode her horse toward the one-room schoolhouse, her eyes would drift to it. Something about the cabin unsettled her, perhaps its stillness, or the strange comfort it seemed to hold, like a wound that refused to heal. One evening after class, curiosity got the better of her. She followed the dirt road as the sky deepened into a burnt orange. The air smelled of sage and dust. When she reached the cabin, her heart skipped. There, clear as day, were dozens of footprints leading right up to the door, but none leaving. And when she called out, "Hello?" the wind answered back with a whisper that almost sounded like her name. The next morning, Evelyn mentioned the cabin to Samuel Cooper, an elderly farmer who often helped maintain the schoolyard fence. His weathered face stiffened immediately. "You stay clear of that place, Miss Hart," he said, his voice rough from years of wind and worry. "That's the McCall cabin. Ain't been touched since the fire?" "Fire?" she asked. He nodded. "Spring of '08. Lightning struck during a storm. Daniel McCall, his wife Clara, and their little boy Jesse. Only the cabin's frame survived. Folks said they found footprints in the mud even after the fire was out, like someone kept coming back." Evelyn shivered. "But why would there still be footprints now?" Samuel shook his head. "Some say it's their spirits. Others think it's people lost in the plains, drawn there without knowing why. Either way, it's a place that remembers pain, and it don't forget those who visit." Despite the warning, Evelyn couldn't let it rest. Something in her heart, a mixture of compassion and unease, kept calling her back. The following Saturday she returned with a lantern and courage that wavered like its flame. The door creaked open easily, though no one had lived there for years. Inside, the air was cool and heavy, carrying faint traces of smoke and lavender. Dust hung thick in the stillness, disturbed only by her breathing. On the far wall she saw a charred patch where the fire must have started. Nearby, the floorboards looked uneven. Kneeling down, she pried one loose, and beneath it, wrapped in oilcloth, was a letter. It was dated April 3rd, 1908. The paper trembled in her hands as she read, "If anyone finds this, tell Jesse. We forgive him. The storm wasn't his fault. Love." Mama and Papa Evelyn gasped softly. A child? What had Jesse done? Evelyn couldn't rest that night. The letter's words echoed in her mind. "Tell Jesse we forgive him." The next day she asked the townsfolk what they remembered about the McCalls. Old Mrs. Pritchard, who ran the dry goods store, sighed deeply. "Little Jesse. He was just 9, loved playing with matches. Always curious, that one. They say he knocked over a lantern during the thunderstorm, trying to light it when the wind blew out the flame." The fire spread fast. Only the neighbors miles away saw the glow. By the time they reached the cabin, it was too late. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. What happened to Jesse? Mrs. Pritchard hesitated. He ran off. No one ever found him. Some say he wandered into the plains, couldn't live with the guilt. That evening, as Evelyn watched the setting sun, she thought she saw the faint outline of a small boy standing near the cabin, barefoot, still waiting. Days passed, and strange things began to happen. Each morning, Evelyn noticed more footprints outside the cabin. Some were small, others large. Some seemed pressed deep into the earth, as if whoever made them was carrying something heavy. The townspeople said she was imagining things, but she wasn't. She began sketching the prints each morning in her notebook. By the end of a week, there were too many to count. Then one evening, she brought her lantern again and sat quietly by the door. The prairie wind moaned through the grass. The light flickered, and she whispered into the darkness, "Jesse, if you're still here, it wasn't your fault." A soft breeze brushed her cheek. Then, faintly, new prints began forming in the dust right before her eyes, small, hesitant, as if belonging to a child unsure of being seen. Evelyn's heart raced. "It's okay," she whispered. "You can come home." The next morning, Evelyn wasn't alone. A man stood by the schoolhouse gate, a quiet, sun-worn traveler with a distant gaze. His clothes were dusty, his hat low over tired eyes. "Ma'am," he said softly, "you the one been going up to the McCall cabin?" Evelyn hesitated. "Yes, I suppose I am." He nodded slowly. "Then I owe you my thanks." His voice trembled as he removed his hat. "My name's Jesse. Jesse McCall." Her breath caught. The lost boy, grown into a man. "You survived the fire?" He nodded, tears glinting in the sun. "Ran for miles that night. Couldn't face what I'd done. I thought if I stayed away, maybe the pain would fade. But every year, I see the dust in my dreams, the footprints at the door. I reckon my folks been waiting for me to come back." Evelyn led Jesse back along the familiar road. The wind was gentle that evening, almost welcoming. When the cabin came into view, Jesse froze. His eyes filled with memories of laughter, firelight, and the night that took it all away. He knelt by the door, trembling. "They used to sit right here," he whispered. "Mama would sing while Papa carved toys." Evelyn placed a hand on his shoulder. "They forgave you, Jesse." "I found their letter." He looked up sharply. You did?" She nodded and handed it to him. The paper had yellowed, but the words remained clear. As he read, his tears darkened the ink. "All these years," he choked, "I thought I was cursed." He set the letter gently against the threshold. "If their spirit's been walking here, maybe tonight they can finally rest." The wind shifted. For the first time in years, the prairie felt still. That night, Evelyn and Jesse stayed by the cabin's porch, lighting a small lantern in honor of the McCalls. The glow cast soft halos in the dark, illuminating the sea of footprints that stretched like a map of waiting souls. Jesse whispered, "I used to think fire was the enemy. But maybe it was just trying to bring me back." Evelyn smiled through tears. "Sometimes pain does that. It burns away everything until only truth is left." For the first time, Jesse laughed quietly. "My folks used to say the earth remembers everything. Maybe that's why the footprints never fade." As the flame flickered lower, they both noticed something strange. The older footprints began to smooth over one by one, as if being gently brushed away by invisible hands. Only two sets remained, Evelyn's and Jesse's, side by side, leading to the cabin door. At dawn, Jesse stood before the cabin, the letter clutched in his hands. "I don't know if I got the right to step inside," he said quietly. Evelyn nodded. "Maybe it's not about permission. Maybe it's about peace." He hesitated, then turned the handle. The door creaked, revealing the dim interior. The air was still, filled with a faint warmth that shouldn't have been there. On the far wall where the fire had scarred the wood, light streamed through a crack, forming the outline of a handprint. Jesse approached it slowly and placed his palm against the mark. For a moment, the sunlight flared brighter, and he felt a familiar presence surround him, soft, forgiving, and endless. Then the breeze outside shifted, and all around the cabin, the footprints vanished. Evelyn whispered, tears in her eyes, "The cabin's been waiting for you to come home." For a long moment after Jesse touched the wall, silence wrapped the cabin. The air was thick with warmth, and faint rays of dawn poured through the cracks like threads of gold. Evelyn watched from the doorway, her hand pressed over her heart. The silence wasn't empty, it was listening. Jesse lowered his hand, his eyes moist. "I can almost hear them," he whispered. "Mama humming, Papa whittling wood by the stove." He looked toward the far corner, where the charred floor still bore the outline of the old hearth. This is where it all began and ended. Evelyn took a step closer. Maybe not ended, maybe just paused, until now, outside, the prairie wind shifted again, gentler than before. A single tumbleweed rolled past the porch, as though the plains themselves were sighing in relief. For the first time in 8 years, the McCall cabin felt alive again. As sunlight filled the cabin, Jesse's gaze fell upon something half buried near the blackened hearth. He knelt, brushing away soot and dust. Beneath it lay a small singed leather book, his mother's journal. He opened it carefully. The first few pages were brittle, filled with delicate handwriting. Evelyn leaned in as he read aloud. "The storms have been fierce this spring, but Jesse's laughter keeps the fear away. He says the lightning sounds like angels stomping their boots." He smiled faintly, voice trembling. "Daniel says we'll plant cotton again once the rain stops. He wants to teach Jesse how to build a fence. I pray these winds calm soon." Then, on the final entry, dated just hours before the fire, the ink ran in blurred streaks. "If anything happens tonight, let the world remember, love is stronger than fear." Jesse closed the journal, tears glistening on his lashes. "She knew," he whispered. "She knew they'd forgive me." That night Jesse stayed at the cabin. Evelyn offered to remain nearby, keeping her lantern lit outside the door. As the stars scattered across the black prairie sky, Jesse sat inside, staring at the faint handprint of light on the wall. Around midnight, he heard the floor creak softly behind him. He turned, but no one was there. The air shimmered faintly, warm and golden. Then he heard a voice, gentle, like wind through wheat. "Jesse." He froze. The voice was unmistakable, his mother's. "Ma?" His voice cracked. A faint outline formed in the light near the doorway, a woman's silhouette holding the hand of a small boy. The boy smiled, and Jesse realized he was seeing himself, the child he used to be. Tears flooded his eyes. "I've missed you both so much." The woman's figure stepped forward, placing a hand over her heart. "We never left, Jesse. We were waiting for your footprints to come home." Then the vision faded into the soft glow of the lantern's light. At dawn, Evelyn entered quietly. Jesse sat by the doorway, the old letter, the one she had found resting in his hands. "They came to me," he said softly, "not like ghosts. More like memories made real." He held the letter up. "I want to give it back to them. It was never mine to keep." He dug a small hole beside the cabin steps and placed the letter inside, wrapping it in cloth. Then he whispered a prayer. Evelyn stood beside him, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "You've carried their forgiveness all this time," she said. "Now it's time to forgive yourself." Jesse nodded slowly. Maybe that's what the cabin was waiting for. As he patted the soil flat, The wind rose suddenly, swirling around them. When it calmed, the dust settled, and for the first time, there were no footprints at the door. Word spread quickly through the plains. The townsfolk who had long feared the McCall cabin began to visit again, tentatively at first. Mrs. Pritchard brought a basket of wildflowers. Farmer Cooper repaired the broken fence posts. Children, once warned to stay away, now played in the open field nearby. "It feels different now," one of them said. "Like the air's cleaner." Evelyn watched from a distance, smiling. The cabin had gone from a place of fear to one of quiet peace. Jesse worked silently, mending shutters and sweeping out decades of dust. When he found an old wooden toy horse beneath the floorboards, his hands shook. He set it on the windowsill, facing the sunrise. "This place ain't haunted," he told Evelyn one afternoon. "It was just lonely." And for the first time, the cabin's door remained open, inviting light to fill the rooms once darkened by sorrow. Weeks later, a summer storm rolled across the plains, the kind that drenched everything in minutes. Lightning flashed across the sky, and thunder cracked like the earth splitting in two. Evelyn rushed toward the cabin on horseback, fearing the worst. She found Jesse standing by the doorway, rain streaming down his face. "You should leave," she shouted over the roar of wind. He shook his head. "Not this time. I'm not running anymore." The rain poured harder, flooding the path. Inside, water seeped through the floorboards, but Jesse kept his hand on the wall where the handprint had once glowed. "Fire took them," he said, voice steady. "But water can't take me." When the storm finally passed, the cabin still stood, stronger than before. And when the sun broke through the clouds, the earth outside shimmered with hundreds of new footprints. But this time, they were leaving the cabin, stretching far across the plains like trails of freedom. As the community rebuilt what the storm had damaged, Jesse decided to create something lasting. He gathered the townsfolk one afternoon and placed a small wooden box on the cabin porch. Inside, he placed his mother's journal, a carving of the toy horse, and a note written in his own hand. "To whoever finds this, know that forgiveness can outlive fire, and love can outlast time." Evelyn added her own letter, a teacher's reflection on how the cabin had taught more than any classroom ever could. The children placed wild flowers and small stones from the nearby creek. Together, they sealed the box and buried it beneath the doorframe, the same place where the footprints had always appeared. The townsfolk bowed their heads in silence, and in that moment, the cabin was no longer a relic of tragedy. It had become a monument of remembrance and grace. Autumn arrived, painting the plains in shades of gold and rust. Evelyn's teaching contract was nearing its end, and a letter from Kansas City invited her to return home. On her last evening in Oklahoma, she visited the cabin one final time. Jesse stood at the door, his face calm and weathered by peace rather than grief. "You're leaving," he said gently. She nodded. "It's time, but I'll carry this place with me." He smiled faintly. "The plains don't forget good souls." They stood together, watching the sunset. The light spilled across the earth like liquid gold. When Evelyn turned to leave, she glanced back one last time. There, in the dust before the door, were two fresh sets of footprints, hers and Jesse's, leading away side by side. Neither of them noticed that behind them, a faint glow lingered in the doorway, like a promise kept. Years passed. The town grew. Roads were built. New families settled. And the McCall cabin became part of the land's quiet history. Children learned the story of the cabin that collected footprints in school, how it once held sorrow, and how forgiveness turned it sacred. In 1934, a group of travelers stopped by the ruins. The cabin had aged, its roof half collapsed, but one thing remained untouched: the ground before its door. There, even after decades of wind and rain, the earth was smooth, no footprints, no tracks, only peace. One traveler found a small wooden horse sitting on the windowsill, untouched by time. He smiled and said softly, "Someone must have loved this place deeply." And as they walked away, the prairie wind carried a faint sound, like laughter carried through time. In the winter of 1941, a young woman visited the old McCall cabin. She carried a notebook filled with her grandmother's handwriting, Evelyn Hart's. As she stood by the doorway, snow falling gently around her, she read aloud from Evelyn's final entry. Some stories never truly end. They just wait for someone to listen again. She placed her hand on the doorframe and felt a faint warmth beneath her palm, even through the cold. Then she stepped back and smiled. The snow beneath her feet formed a perfect print, clear and deep. Moments later, a breeze swept across the plains, smoothing the snow flat, erasing her step. The land had taken it, the same way it had taken all the others, gently, with gratitude. And so, the cabin that once collected footprints now kept only silence. A silence filled with love, forgiveness, and the memory of those who finally came home.